A trove of documents is released and found pertaining to Joe Biden's vice presidency at a Biden think tank. So we'll be talking about that, and we'll ask the question as to whether or not the FBI is going to go storming in there, guns blazing, with 1,000 agents to come back and tear the place apart with a fine-tooth comb. I mean, we all know the answer to that, but we'll talk about that anyway. In other news, Kevin McCarthy has been elected Speaker of the House. This happened shortly after we went off the air on Friday, so we'll be talking about that. What this means, some of the drama coming about with this, with Matt Gaetz and Mike Rogers, and Nancy Mace making her opinion known as well. So we'll go over some of that and what happens with that. Joe Biden visits the border, and Greg Abbott hands him a letter while he's visiting the border. So we'll be talking just a bit about what all that means, what the failed policies look like, and what's happening with that. And a coup, per se, happens in Brazil, so we'll be going over what that means, what's going on in Brazil, and why I do think that some of this is symbolic and possibly planned by an outside source. It is going to be all of this and more. I got more votes than Kevin McCarthy. I am Jay Edgar, and this is Contemporary. I'm going to be having a conversation with Spectrum, I think, after this. We were 12 minutes in, and just everything disconnected. Like, completely disconnected. And I don't know what the purpose was behind that, but it's just, yeah, it all disappeared, and I saw the reconnecting notice off of that. It just wouldn't reconnect, and I went over to YouTube and saw that it had completely disconnected. So I waited around for it to come back up and show up, and I'll delete that video too. But we're going to try this again over here because we do have a ton to go over here, and now we're behind the 8 ball because now we're 20 minutes behind over on Contemporary. So before we get started, make sure you guys go check out great programming such as The Daily Ignoramus, The Breakdown with Birkenhoff, The R-Rated Conservative, The Porch Boys. Go check out Tweets by Brit, Mr. Behavior, and the No Gimmicks podcast. Mr. Behavior returning to the political eye after spending so much time off of the political eye. Mr. Behavior, of course, took some time off while he was going through school because he didn't want people to figure out who he was and go back to a school and get him kicked out of that. But he is now just finishing up for video game design, got married, little one on the way, so we have nothing but respect for him and everything that he has going for his life. So we'll be sending congratulations to him. He just put out a new video talking about trans-canonism, which is bizarre. I don't know about people who want to be dogs or anything else like that, but we'll talk about that and where we go with that and what that means. So go check out Mr. Behavior. Make sure you guys go check out Midget B's Majora's Mask stream tonight. Ocarina of Time, no. But that's going to be after we get through with 57 tabs that I have up top here. And gosh darn it, we're going to finish all of them. So strap yourselves in, get a drink, grab a little bit of dinner, grab the family around, because I will not be saying the F word on this stream. A couple of the videos might be, but I will not be saying it personally. So get the family around. We will see what's happening over here on Contemporary. And let's get started with the finance. Looking in. Oh, I gotta get the Dow back up because I closed that because we were actually past that. That's how far into the stream we were when everything crashed. All right, starting with the Dow today. The Dow is at 33,517.65. It, after spending most of the day up, turned itself in reverse coming towards the end of the day, bringing itself back down below the previous close to 33,517.65. That is down 112.96 points, or just about 1/3% on the day. So we'll be talking from IBD about what's happening with that. Only one finance article today because, well, I'm going to tell you right off the bat, we don't have a lot of room for anything else. The Bitcoin has reset, but it took a jump and then an immediate drop. But we can go back out and look at what happened over the weekend, where it did take a fairly significant jump and then just recently another fairly significant jump before dropping itself back down to settle at 17,189.50. It lost about 1/3% on the day today before we saw the reset, and I saw that right as the stream disconnected. So that's what we have coming off of that. Looking in at the gas prices around the Madison area, which do look like they are coming back down and settling once again. And I mean, they're still holding kind of steady where I'm at right now. I just had to go back and throw a 30 in at 309 on the other side of La Crosse. So that's coming back down here. But looking in at the Madison area, the quick trip leaving on 151 is at 309. The quick trip leaving out on the north side is at 316. Out on the west side, we are back down below $3 a gallon to 298. The three on the other side of the belt line is at 308. The Speedway is at 309. On the Isthmus is at 3 even at the Amoco. The quick trip entering is still at 316. The BP leaving town has dropped to 303. So we've got a little bit of a mixed bag. Some of the stations coming down, some of them increasing. A lot of stuff happening with that, and it does look like we'll get some reprieve, although I don't know how long it's going to last. I do think it's going to be temporary, but that's what we see coming off of that. Our one finance article for today coming to us from Investors Business Daily. Let's get the live chat up so I can see what you guys are doing. Dow Jones, S&P 500 reversed lower. A few stocks break out, but volume mixed. This is from Vidya Ramakrishnan. The Dow Jones Industrial Average finished lower to start the first week of the fourth quarter earnings season, The blue chip index was down 0.3% at closing bell on Monday after rising nearly 1% earlier today. It remained above its 50-day moving average. The S&P also reversed lower and closed 0.1 lower. It had risen above its 50-day line today, but closed below it. The Nasdaq led with a 0.6% gain and backed off after approaching the 50-day line. The small cap Russell 2000 finished higher by 0.2%, though it also gave up much of its gains. Volume on the New York Stock Exchange fell on the Nasdaq according to preliminary data. Several stocks topped buy points, but some faded below entries. Modine and Amcor still held up and volume was good. Modine is in a buy zone from a buy point of 22.23. Amcor is in a buy zone from a cups-based buy point of 29.20. SLB fell back slightly from its buy point at 56.14. Volume was weak. Oil and gas drilling services company Halliburton broke out of a cup with handle base and buy point of 40.09. The Innovator IBD 50 ETF was up by 0.2% at the close of the day. Crude oil rose 1% to trade at $74.80 a barrel. The yield on the benchmark 10-year Treasury note fell 5 points to 3.55. According to the latest data from the S&P Global Market Intelligence, real GDP rose 2% in 2022. Strong numbers from trade and inventories in November resulted in above trendline GDP growth in the second half of the year, and I don't buy a word of that, so I'm going to call full-on bullshit for that. Joel Prakken, co-head of U.S. Economic at the S&P Global Market Intelligence, said, "An emerging risk as the economy remains stronger for longer than previously anticipated, requiring a more aggressive and persistent monetary tightening to prevent higher inflation from becoming entrenched. A mild recession remains a strong possibility in the first half of 2023. So we'll be watching for that. We will see what happens with the finance, and we will check in with the Dow every day to see what's happening with that, because while that is not an indicator of what the economy is, it is an indicator of what the people who make the decisions on the economy anticipate that it's going to do within the next 3 months. So we will see what happens with that and where that goes. But we are out of finance for the day because we've got way too much other stuff to go over here today. So let's finish and with that and go in and talk about Biden from CNN to start with. Classified documents from Biden's time as VP discovered in private office, sources say. From Jamie Kingill. Now, I do hope that the sources are named, but I've got this feeling they're not going to be. And one of the things that worries me about this is I'm almost a little bit afraid that this is going to be people who are just looking at this and saying, oh, yeah, no, it's time to throw the old man under the bus because he's about to get investigated and we need to make as much distance from him as possible. That was, as soon as I saw this, that was the first thing that crossed my mind is, okay, they're trying to put some distance between the party, capital T, capital P, and Biden. But let's read and see what's happening with this. Several classified documents from President Joe Biden's time as vice president were discovered last fall at a private office. A source with knowledge of the matter tells CNN, who is, of course, again, unnamed. The National Archives has referred the matter to the Justice Department for further investigation, the source told CNN. Biden's lawyers found the government materials in November while closing out a D.C.-based office that Biden used as part of his relationship with the University of Pennsylvania, where he was an honorary professor from 2017 to 2019, the source says. Can you imagine that, taking that class? Back in my day, you could take the change out of your pocket and pay for a semester of college, and now you can't do that because policies that are out there, and it's really Republican stuff. Even though we've advanced student loans to the point that the schools can charge whatever they want, but still vote for me and I'll get you forgiveness, man. Come on. No, he was an honorary professor. They didn't give him a class. They just gave him a title and said, "Okay, Grandpa, thank you for your service." Fewer than a dozen classified documents were found at Biden's office. The source said it's unclear what the documents pertain to or why they were taken to Biden's private office. Federal office holders are required by law to relinquish official documents and classified records when their government service ends. The White House is cooperating with the National Archives and the Department of Justice regarding the discovery of what appear to be Obama-Biden admin records, including a small number of documents with classified markings. Richard Sauber, special counsel to President Biden, said in a statement. The documents were discovered when the president's personal attorneys were packing files housed in a locked closet to prepare to vacate the office space at the Penn Biden Center in D.C. The president periodically used this space from mid-2017 until the start of the 2020 campaign. On the date of this discovery, November 2nd, 2022, the White House counsel's office notified the National Archives. The archives took possession of the materials the following morning. The discovery of these documents was made by the president's attorneys, Sauber added. The documents were not the subject of any previous request or inquiry by the archives. Since that discovery, the president's personal attorneys have cooperated with the archives and the DOJ in a process to ensure that any Obama-Biden admin records are appropriately in the possession of the archives. CBS News first reported on the documents. Now, a few things that are happening with this. And there are a few different avenues that this can go. Now, one thing I will note right off the bat is, and we can maybe page through the CBS article that goes through this, but it doesn't appear that there is any information on this right now. We can even look at some of the videos, but I mean, the source is unnamed. So this could be the janitor that sweeps up outside of there that heard some attorney say, "Hey, look, we found some documents." This could be coming from the attorney's office itself. This could be coming from the cabinet itself. We don't know where any of this is coming from right now. These are, as usual, unnamed sources that cannot be verified, which does make me question a lot of what's happening with this. Now, a couple things that can go with this. Number one, and I doubt they'll go this direction, but one of the things that we can see is an announcement that, hey, really, classified documents aren't that big of a deal. Jack Smith, just stop your investigation. We don't need any of this stuff here. It's a mistake. Everything's a mistake. We don't have to do anything with it. Number two, obviously, is going to be differential treatment, because this was, if this is true, and I don't necessarily buy this right now, but if this is true, then this is a legitimate mishandling of classified documents from somebody who could not just declassify them. Or in an even more nefarious position off of this, I can see Biden landing under the bus, directly under the bus, with the tire marks still on him, and getting picked up and brought in and removed from office so Kamala Harris can become the president. You know, this could be one of the things to force him to step down and resign. Nixon style, of course. Because then that opens the avenue and the door for them to go back and use the same standard against the evil orange man. There are a lot of different avenues that this can go, but I mean, the first thing that I need to see before I can start buying this is a name on the source. And oddly enough, we don't get that. But let's listen to what CBS has to say about this. U.S. attorneys reviewing classified documents from Joe Biden's vice presidency found at Biden think tank. The article is by Adriana Diaz, Andres Treye, and Arden Farhi, but let's listen to what they have to say, because I think this is just a review of what CNN reported. Maybe.
Has spoken to us. We had multiple requests for comment from the White House, and we did receive a...
There we go.
And some breaking news. CBS News has learned that classified documents belonging to President Biden from his time as vice president were discovered at the Penn Biden Center, a policy research center here in Washington, D.C. This, of course, follows the fallout over former President Trump's possession of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, which the FBI seized this summer. So for more on this, we have CBS News correspondent Adriana Diaz joining me now. Adriana, what a story. Tell us more.
Caitlin, this is exclusive CBS News reporting. We have learned 3 sources have confirmed to us that classified documents were located at the Biden Center. Now, this is a think tank. It is a foreign policy research institute here in Washington. And what we have learned, we've asked the White House repeatedly for comment on this. We have learned late today from the White House that this was on November 2nd. This was lawyers for President Biden were at the Biden Center clearing out office space because the president had some office space here in this building after his time as vice president. So they were clearing out office space, and inside a locked closet, they located classified material. They recognized the classified markings. As soon as they did, they said that they stopped their work and they contacted the White House counsel's office. We are told it is a small number of documents, roughly 10. And at this point, we aren't sure. We haven't been given information on the nature of the documents, how severe or sensitive they are. But even one document, extremely sensitive, could be problematic, of course. So then what happened from there? This information went through a chain. The lawyers contacted the White House counsel's office. The White House counsel's office, in turn, contacted the National Archive, where the documents should have been located. That's normal protocol. National Archive contacted the Department of Justice. We have learned that the Attorney General himself has tapped the U.S. Attorney in Chicago, John Lausch, to take a look at this situation, to review the documents. He came here to D.C. to do so, and to also determine other factors, how they ended up at this location.
So, again, I'm not sure where this is going to go. This is just breaking. Like, when I sat down to organize the news tabs at 5:20, this was just breaking right now. So this one's worth watching. I'm going to put a pin in this one so we continue to see if something develops or if this just drops off the news, because I do think that at some point this is just going to drop off the news. But we have got to talk McCarthy. What would have been the top story of the day had not for this been breaking? From the Blaze, that was easy, huh? Kevin McCarthy becomes the Speaker of the House after 15 tries. And then it was over. After more than 4 days of public wrangling, Representative Kevin McCarthy has finally secured enough votes to become the Speaker of the House of the 118th Congress. Boo! Well, that was easy, huh? He joked shortly after the 15th round of voting had ended and he had been named the winner. As late as 10 p.m. Friday evening, it appeared that the drama would continue after McCarthy fell 1 vote shy of the speakership when Matt Gaetz, one of the ringleaders in the anti-McCarthy faction, voted present. However, just before 12:30 a.m. on Saturday morning, McCarthy sealed the victory when Gaetz, as well as fellow Republican holdouts Andy Biggs, Lauren Boebert, Eli Crane, Bob Good, and Matt Rosendale all voted present, allowing McCarthy to be elected Speaker with 216 votes. No Republican voted against him in favor of another candidate during that final round of voting. Democrats unanimously stood behind their appointed leader, Hakeem Jeffries, who received all 212 votes from his party after the final votes had been tallied. Jeffries introduced McCarthy as the Speaker of the House, and McCarthy then stood before the elected body and gave a speech during which he promised to make good on all of the concessions he made to Gates and his other detractors. Yeah, I'll buy that when I see it, because I don't believe that. I'm going to tell you that right off the bat. I don't believe a word of that. McCarthy vowed that among the very first hearings the new Republican-controlled House would conduct would relate to the crisis at the U.S. southern border, and that he and his fellow Republicans would soon vote to repeal funding for 87,000 new IRS agents, according to the Daily Mail. He likewise promised restoring one-member motion to vacate the chair rule, which would allow a single rep to introduce a resolution to oust the Speaker should he fail to live up to his promises. I want to see, obviously, only one member needs to make the motion. But now, how many people have to vote on that? 4 seats for the Freedom Caucus members on the House Rules Committee, which controls which legislation comes to the floor for a vote. A vote on term limits for both representatives and senators, which is going to die in the Senate, and if it does manage to eke out any support in the Senate, will die in the White House. Transferring the power to determine committee leadership to the committee members themselves and away from party leadership. That I'm in favor of. And fiscal responsibility, which we are not actually going to get. We've got a 4-minute clip of the video that, the speech that he gave, which was 20 minutes, by the way. I was going to include the speech in its entirety, but once I found out it was 20 minutes, I said, no, we're not going to do that. He's relentless. The man does not quit. Patrick McHenry of North Carolina said of McCarthy. In fact, McCarthy made so many concessions to the Republican holdouts that even Gates had to admit on Friday that he was running out of things to ask for. We'll talk about that a little bit later. After the speakership vote was finally settled, the House was expected to vote on the rules package that McCarthy and the holdouts had negotiated in recent days. However, the body instead decided to delay the vote until Monday. McCarthy then swore in the rest of the elected representatives in a mass ceremony just before 0200, at which point the new House members voted to adjourn for the weekend. So let's listen to a portion of the speech that McCarthy made when he started out.
The Speaker-elect, the Honorable Kevin McCarthy from California.
It is now my solemn responsibility to hand over the people's gavel to a son of Bakersfield, a former small business owner, a proud product of a firefighter's household, the gentleman from the great state of California and the next Speaker of the 118th Congress, Kevin McCarthy.
Ooh.
That was easy, huh? I never thought we'd get up here.
I was hoping.
Thank you, Minority Leader Jeffries. Hakeem, I've got to warn you. 2 years ago, I got 100% of the vote from my conference. You know, my father always told me, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. And now we need to finish strong for the American.
Kind of wish your father would have finished outside, but that's another story for another time.
American people. To Leader Jeffries, there will be times we agree, and many times we will differ. I promise our debates will be passionate, but they will never be personal. That's my commitment to you.
Jeffries will, on the other hand, be making everything personal.
Our system is built on checks and balances. It's time for us to be a check and provide some balance to the president's policies. We will hold the swamp accountable. From the withdrawal of
I'll believe that when I see
Afghanistan
it.
to the origins of COVID and to the weaponization of the FBI. Let me be very clear. We will use the power of the purse and the power of the subpoena to get the job done. This moment calls for restoring trust within our country and with each other. In that spirit, I will work with anyone and everyone who shares our passion to deliver a better future for the nation. I hope you'll join me. As a Congress, we can only operate. Let me close with this. I may not know all of you, some of you are new, but I hope one thing is clear after this week. I never give up.
Madam Clerk, I rise.
And if I had any faith that you were going to be using that I never give up for good, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But, I mean, it's McCarthy. So, a little cocky, that's for sure. After the vote, Matt Gaetz got a little bit heated over here. So let's see what Gaetz had going on. No audio, it looks like. If there is audio, we can't hear it. Looks like there is some of it coming through. Nice. Oh, yeah. Oh! I kind of wish there would have been a fist fight on the floor, or at least up in the chairs. So a little bit of stuff going on here now. Nancy Mace getting in on this here. From The Hill, Nancy Mace blasts Matt Gaetz as a fraud for fundraising off McCarthy speaker votes. From Stephen Newcomb, Nancy Mace called fellow Republican Matt Gaetz a fraud for fundraising off his efforts to block Speaker McCarthy from winning the position last week. Matt Gaetz is a fraud. Every time he voted against McCarthy last week, he sent out a fundraising email. Mace said on CBS's Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan. What you saw last week was a constitutional process diminished by those kinds of political actions. Let me get rid of the autoplay video here. Gaetz was part of a group of about 20 holdouts who barred McCarthy from becoming speaker for 14 rounds of voting. Gaetz was among what ultimately became 6 lawmakers who voted present in a 15th round of voting early Saturday that allowed McCarthy to capture the post after making a host of concessions to far-right lawmakers. I have no regrets about casting my vote on the House floor against Kevin McCarthy for Speaker, one Gaetz fundraising email read. The Hill has reached out to Gaetz' office for comment. Mace offered sharp criticism of Gaetz and other Republicans who were demanding concessions from McCarthy. She said she had significant heartburn over the deal-making that she said was not done transparently. We don't know what they got or didn't get, Mace said. We haven't seen it. We don't have any idea what promises were made. I don't support that kind of behavior. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that either. I'm not going to lie. The House is set to vote on a rules package on Monday, which it needs to adopt before any further business of the chamber can be conducted. The House came to a standstill all of last week during the speakership vote, which also delayed the swearing in of all of its members. And if that's not enough, let's actually see what it is on Face the Nation that Nancy Mace had to say.
The Speaker has reportedly given the Freedom Caucus, that ultra-conservative faction, a third of the seats on the powerful Rules Committee, which controls which bills make it to the floor. You've called Matt Gaetz, one of its members, a political D-lister and a fraud. You've sparred with Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'll show our viewers part of that and let them interpret your meaning. How are you going to work with these folks to get anything done for the American people?
It's going to be very difficult. Matt Gaetz is a fraud. Every time he voted against Kevin McCarthy last week, he sent out a fundraising email. What you saw last week was a constitutional process diminished by those kinds of political actions. I don't support that kind of behavior. I am very concerned as someone who represents a lot of centrists, a lot of independents. I have as many independents and Democrats as I have Republicans in my district. I have to represent everybody. I am concerned that common sense legislation will not get through to get a vote on the floor. And for example, we have 12 bills that we're supposedly going to be voting on in our first week in office. 3 of them are abortion bills and pro-life bills. I am pro-life, but I have many exceptions. But they are not pieces of legislation that can pass the Senate and get onto the desk for the president to sign into law. And so if we're going to be serious about protecting life, for example, maybe we should look at more centrist views like ensuring every woman has access to birth control. Because if you can reduce pregnancies, you can reduce the need or want for women to have abortions. For example, a very common sense, pragmatic point of view. But that's not what we're going to be voting on this week. Yep. And I am concerned. I want to see pragmatics at work, common sense, fiscal conservative issues at work that represent all views.
Well, we'll see what happens. What else do we have here? Another one from CNN. How McCarthy survived the House chaos to win the Speaker's gavel. From Melanie Zanona, Manu Raju, Annie Grayer, Lauren Fox, and Jeremy Herb. Matt Gaetz strode into the House Leader Kevin McCarthy's office on Monday night with a list of demands, among them the chairman of the key House Armed Services Subcommittee. McCarthy rejected the offer. That decision set in motion a chain of events that left Gaetz and McCarthy locked in open confrontation on the House floor late Friday night. Gaetz, McCarthy's staunchest opponent, dramatically denied McCarthy the final vote he needed to become Speaker. Then Gaetz and the last holdouts abruptly changed course, allowing McCarthy to win the Speaker's gavel on his 15th attempt. Before the final vote, the pandemonium erupted on the House floor after Gates waited until the very end of the 14th ballot to vote present, when McCarthy needed just one more yes vote. Stunned after believing that he had all the votes, McCarthy faced his most embarrassing defeat yet. McCarthy's allies encircled Gates and tried to find a way forward. McCarthy soon made a beeline for discussions and started engaging in Gates too. After McCarthy walked away from Gates looking dejected, Armed Services Chairman Mike Rogers moved towards the conversation and lunged at Gates, having to be physically restrained by Republican Rep. Richard Hudson of North Carolina. Rogers, a Republican from Alabama, who earlier this week warned the GOP dissidents that they would lose their committee assignments, told Gates he would be finished for continuing to wreck the Speaker's vote. Nearby, Rep. Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia was trying to convince Matt Rosendale of Montana, another McCarthy holdout, to take her cell phone and speak to former President Trump, who was on the line. Finally, the House clerk announced for the 14th time that no one had the votes to be Speaker. Republicans moved to adjourn the chamber until Monday. As the vote timer counted down, 218 Republicans had voted yes, a majority that would have sent McCarthy home for the weekend and left the House in paralysis at the hands of Gates and his ally. But with less than a minute left to go in the vote, Gates moved towards the front of the chamber, grabbed a red index card to change his vote on the adjournment. Gates walked towards McCarthy, and the two briefly exchanged words. McCarthy then raised his hand and yelled out, "One more," as he triumphantly walked towards the front of the chamber to change his vote too. It was the GOP leader's final negotiation, capping an emotional roller coaster over the course of 4 days, as he was held hostage by a narrow faction of his conference. Dozens of Republicans followed McCarthy and Gates to defeat the adjournment procedure, and McCarthy's victory, at last, was at hand. The 6 Republican holdouts all voted present in the 15th ballot, giving McCarthy 216 to 212 victory to end the longest Speaker's race since 1859. Rep. Tom Emmer, one of McCarthy's top deputies, went up to and down the aisles telling Republicans at the House floor not to clap for Gates or Boebert when they announced their votes, like they had for other holdouts who had flipped to McCarthy earlier in the day. Asked why he reversed course on McCarthy, Gates said, "I ran out of things I could even imagine to ask for." And again, I don't know what it is that we're going to get. Is this video from another angle? Let's look.
That was just such an incredible moment. I've been covering Congress for 10 years. I have never seen anything like that on the House floor before. But we are learning new details thanks to my colleague Annie Greer, who is in the chamber and was also working her sources to figure out what happened. And in this moment, that moment is when Kevin McCarthy realized that he wasn't going to have the votes because Rosendale had voted present. And so Kevin McCarthy was completely dejected. You saw him walk up the aisle towards where Boebert and Gates were sitting and pleading with them to vote for him. He was in a moment of desperation. And then you saw Mike Rogers coming up from behind the well, coming down the aisle. And this is someone, he's a chairman. He is a close McCarthy ally. He has been growing more frustrated with the holdouts all week. So that is important context. In fact, we are told that he had threatened to kick some of the holdouts off of their committee assignments if they didn't fall in line. So he was so frustrated, he came down the aisle, and sources told Annie Greer that he basically said, "Matt, you're finished," to him. And at that point, Hudson, another member, came up behind him, sort of muzzled him and tried to hold him back so he wasn't able to speak anymore. But it really spoke to the moment of just how tense things were and how it looked like it was all falling apart for Kevin McCarthy. But almost as quickly as it fell apart, things then came together. We were told that leadership was then informed that Gates was a yes, and then they were, instead of motioning to adjourn, there was another moment of chaos where they switched their votes and they were deciding to do another speaker vote. And then what ended up happening is every single one of those remaining holdouts voted present. So just a complete roller coaster of a vote, of a day, of a week, really ever since the midterms. This has been a roller coaster for Kevin McCarthy. So a huge sigh of relief for him and his allies tonight.
Well, that's apparently what happened. Of course, we didn't get any audio for it, so we can't say that for sure, but that's apparently what came out of that. We've talked about we ran out of things to ask for, so we'll skip over this one here. I think this is the same video we just watched too, so let's skip that one too. Let's grab one from the Daily Wire. On a little bit of the aftermath for Mike Rogers. From the Daily Wire, Rep. Mike Rogers to step down from GOP steering committee days after tense confrontation with fellow Republican This is from Brandon Dre. I think we forgot about Dre, didn't we? Mike Rogers said Monday he plans on stepping down from serving on the GOP steering committee after a congressional colleague physically restrained him from lunging at Matt Gaetz during a Speaker of the House vote last weekend. Rogers currently represents Region 6 on the steering committee, which includes Alabama and Tennessee. The body makes assignments to be voted on by the Democratic caucus or Republican conference. However, he told Politico he would vacate his seat later this week on his own accord, tasking the region members to elect a new representative. Rogers further noted the news outlet there is a chance he could change his mind. The lawmaker's decision came days after the North Carolina Republican, Rep. Richard Hudson, had to hold Rogers back in a dramatic confrontation with Gaetz, who was one of the last GOP holdouts blocking McCarthy from assuming the role of Speaker of the House during the midnight hours on Saturday. The two have since resolved their differences in the aftermath of McCarthy securing the Speaker's gavel. Matt Gaetz and I have had a long and productive working relationship that I'm sure will continue, Rogers said in a tweet. I regret that I briefly lost my temper on the House floor Friday evening and appreciate Matt's kind understanding. Gaetz extended his forgiveness to Rogers, adding the lawmaker shouldn't face any punishment or reprisal just because he had an animated moment. Politico reported that Robert Aderholt has his eye on the position, while Diana Harshbarger is aggressively working to garner support for the regional spot if Rogers ultimately decides to step down. Which, I mean, it's all a decorum thing, but this is also coming from a chamber where at one point people dueled. People got shot on the floor. So, yeah, a little bit of a flare-up is really not anything at all, but drama in DC, I guess. But of course it can't finish with that coming from Insider. Rep. Tim Burchett said colleague Mike Rogers is a redneck who shouldn't be drinking following House floor brawl. From Aliyah Shawib? Is that how we pronounce that? Tim Burchett called his colleague Rep. Mike Rogers a redneck and suggested that he had been drinking before he'd gotten into a brawl with on the House floor late on Friday. C-SPAN cameras captured Rep. Rogers of Alabama lunging at Matt Gaetz and being restrained by Richard Hudson. We talked about all this. People shouldn't be drinking, especially when you're a redneck on the House floor, Rep. Burchett told CNN's Kate Sullivan about the incident. He did not provide any evidence or elaborate why he believed Rogers had been drinking prior to the incident. He probably has nothing. He's just talking out of his ass. And can do so on CNN because, he's talking out about a Republican, an evil Republican. So he can say whatever he wants. From the Blaze. Daniel Horowitz, 20 House Patriots provide the blueprint for conservatives to reassert control over the failed GOP. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. Democrats fight like Navy SEALs for their prerogatives. Rhinos fight like the Dickens for pretty much the same priorities. Establishment Republicans frantically use leverage to keep their seats at the table in a corporatist globalist system. But we conservatives are supposed to sit like potted plants and just put out the policy papers and never use leverage for liberty the way the bad guys do for tyranny, even within what is supposed to be our own party, in which the overwhelming majority of voters think like us. A group of 20 or so House Republicans have finally shown us the blueprint for exposing the fraud of the conservative-Republican relationship and have provided a path forward to either take over the party or force a much-needed split. There is a dirty little secret we always knew. Conservatives who are willing to fight the system represent only about 10% of the Senate Republicans, and maybe 20 to 30%, including toe-dipping followers, of the House Republicans. The same is more or less true in deep red state legislatures, although the numbers are slowly increasing in most state houses. As for governors, we have just one, the Florida man. In other words, unless we hit the party with blunt force trauma, we may as well just make it official and install Klaus Schwab as the emperor and cut out the middleman, which, by the way, that's also going to be coming. Talking about the WEF. Until now, we've been brainwashed by the legacy Republicans and mouthpiece commentators into thinking conservatives just don't have the numbers for anything, that we should continue putting our policy ideas even though they're going nowhere, and that we should be content with losing by landslides in House private conference votes on bedrock ideas like making the House more representative, transparent, and yes, conservative. Well, if you want to beat them, you must win more seats. Not that these voices ever help us in primaries, and do it the smooth way. You might have heard that line before. Now let's move on with the country club, next in line corporatist globalist shill to fight the Democrats on all the issues that don't matter. In the same way they don't matter at the times they don't matter. That's why we conservatives were there to make points and then summarily lose. Again, this dynamic has played out for decades, not just in the closely divided congressional sessions, but in supermajority red state legislatures. It's also played out in general elections for years. We were told to accept every terrible Republican in a general election, otherwise we would be blamed for a Democrat winning the seat. We complained how black voters constantly remained loyal to Democrats who treated them horribly. But we were no different. Obsequiously serving and slavishly devoted to GOP plantation. Well, the time to defeat bad Republicans is in the primaries, they tell us. If you can't win enough seats, you have no right to demand so much governance within the party. This is a true statement with just one problem. The establishment Republicans don't run on policies they really support in Congress. They run in primaries on our policies. They use their industry money and superior name IDs and organizations to run as conservatives and confuse the voters. Thus, when they're able to run on what they actually believe privately and still win, we will respect their prominence within the party. But if they are going to sabotage our primaries with dishonest obfuscation, then it's time we demand that they get on our plantation rather than the other way around. Our views, not theirs, reflect the hopes and aspirations of the overwhelming majority of Republican voters. And yes, even though it does look like McCarthy is going to be there, I hope that he honors his concessions, that he actually fights the fight that we're looking for. Because one of the things that we, especially like with me, because I'm not a Republican, I vote with them currently because they have the most comprehensive plan to leave me the hell alone. But I will change that on a dime if we go back to the Bushite, Romneyite bullshit that we had before. I will abandon the Republican Party right now. I'll vote LP before I vote for another Bushite, Romneyite thing, and I can't stand that closed primary that the people have no voice in. I hate that. But I will vote for them before I see another Cheney, another Bush in the White House, or in a representative seat, or anything else like that. But I'm glad, because a big part of the problem is that even though the big paid shills come out there and say that all Republicans are exactly like the politicians they vote for, they're not. And they have completely different policy prescriptions and policy ideas. Some of them more cultish than other, but regardless, the face of the Republican Party is not what's in Washington right now. So yes, this was a very, 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 very good blueprint on what we can do at the ballot box and in our local elections as well, to make sure that the people, the McCarthys, the Bushes, the Romneys, all get kicked to the curb where they belong. Hakeem Jeffries with some sour grapes from the Hill. Jeffrey says McCarthy concessions to far-right members are just the beginning. Well, good, from Julia Mueller. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries on Sunday said Speaker McCarthy's concessions to far-right lawmakers in order to flip their votes in his favor during the speakership elections are just the beginning of the dysfunction in the new GOP-led House. Well, our general concern is that the dysfunction that was historic that we saw this week is not an end, it's just the beginning, Jeffries told NBC's Meet the Depressed with host Chuck Todd. Chuck Todd. And while the Congress was held captive this particular time, what is going to be a problem for the American people will be held captive over the next 2 years to the extreme MAGA Republican agenda that apparently has been negotiated into the House rules and the functioning of the Congress, Jeffrey said. And there's that boogeyman again, the MAGA Republican agenda! Yeah, God forbid we represent the people instead of our corporate interests. Which, by the way, Jeffries is also going to criticize them for doing if they chose to do that as well. There is literally no win for the GOP with the mainstream media or people like Hakeem Jeffries. From the Associated Press. I can't believe this has to be said, even though I don't believe it. This is a real headline from the Associated Press. No, the WEF did not appoint McCarthy as House Speaker. This needs to go into my Discord because my friend Midget B is going to put his he's going to put his little six-pointed his little six-pointed stamp of approval on there. Let's read from Melissa Golden. Claim, a page on the WEF Forum's website, is evidence that the organization has appointed Rep. McCarthy as the next Speaker of the House. AP's assessment, false. House members elect the Speaker. The page on the WEF website identifies McCarthy as Majority Leader of the U.S. House of Representatives, a position he held from 2013 to 2019, which is different from the Speaker role. Such pages are created for people who have attended a WEF event or written a blog published on the WEF website, a spokesperson for the organization told the Associated Press. While the House was embroiled on its third day of voting Thursday to elect a new Speaker, some social media users were spreading false claims, alleging the WEF had already appointed McCarthy to the position. I don't see a lie in that, but it seems the WEF had appointed McCarthy as a Speaker already. No need for pesky things like winning elections, one tweet stated, along with a link to McCarthy's page on the WEF website. As of Thursday, it had received more than 3,000 likes and more than 1,000 shares. Other widespread posts claimed, more broadly, the WEF had picked McCarthy to be the leader of the House or endorsed him. The unelected World Economic Forum, a trade organization representing the interests of the 1,000 largest companies in the world, has already chosen and announced the next leader of the U.S. House of Representatives. Another tweet linking to McCarthy's page stated it had received nearly 55,000 likes and more than 26,000 shares as of Thursday. But the WEF, a Geneva-based think tank and event organizer that is best known for hosting annual gatherings in Davos, plays no role in selecting the Speaker of the House. Bullshit. And the page is simply an artifact from McCarthy's past involvement with the organization. Alright. So, the vast majority of U.S. politicians are in this same kind of think tank. So, if they're the ones who are doing the vote, whether it be on their own accord or on the behalf of the WEF, then this is a distinction without a difference. No, of course the WEF didn't come in and say, "No, you will put this man in as Speaker of the House." No, that didn't happen, but, you know, if all people who are allied with that are making the same vote, we have the same thing going on, so. What a joke. Nancy Mace, back in the news. GOP Rep. Nancy Mace says she might oppose the House rules package and calls Gates a fraud. We know about the second part. Nancy Mace said Sunday she was on the fence about supporting a rules package that will govern the way the House operates under Republican control, citing the backroom deal. We're going to skip this one because this was talked about when she was calling Gates a fraud. And we still have a ton to go over here. But on the rules package, though, Politico, one rules package to rule them all. From Catherine Tully McManus. No rules, just right. The House has a Speaker, now it needs some rules. The Chamber is set to vote tonight on a package of rules governing the House for the next 2 years, but for all the discussion of concessions Speaker McCarthy made in his long slog towards the gavel, most aren't in the rules package. One major concession that is written into the package is to allow just one member to introduce a motion to vacate the chair, which could force a vote of no confidence on McCarthy's speakership, which we will probably see, by the way, just so you know. McCarthy had initially pledged to block the revival of the procedural tool, then relented to allow 5 members of the majority to inflict it. Now it's down to just 1 member from either party. Also written into the rules is a 72-hour period required between bills being made public and when they're brought to the floor. This has been the case before, including under Democrats in the 117th, but the requirement is easily waived. Conservatives came to the table last week with a lot of wins already stacked up in the rules package that was first released by GOP leadership more than a week ago. They had pushed for and won provisions that require bills to be about a single subject, which I would love to see, by the way, part of an effort to cut down on sprawling, take it or leave it bills. But there aren't mechanisms for enforcement in the text. The Freedom Caucus also won a victory with a requirement the House vote on any motions that waive germaneness for amendments, which would make attaching provisions dealing with different subjects than the underlying bill more difficult. But most of the concessions aren't up for a vote today. They're handshake agreements made as McCarthy desperately scrambled for votes last week. McCarthy's promised floor votes on an array of priority bills from the conservative flank of the party, including on border security, term limits for House members, and a balanced budget amendment. House Freedom Caucus and other key conservatives demanded more representation on key committees, and they walked away satisfied with an off-the-books commitment from McCarthy that they would get 3 seats on the House Rules Committee. The panel controls what legislation makes it to the House floor, as well as which amendments are made in order for debate. Reshaping the panel could have significant impact on how legislation moves through Congress. So, I'm pretty sure we're going to talk more about this tomorrow and what's in the rules package and what isn't there, but it's going to be a background deal. And hard part of this is it's really hard to go back out and get your way if you're just doing a backroom deal with nothing in writing. But we'll watch this and see what happens with this. Some of the priorities from Axios, McCarthy's fast start, big tech is a top target. From Mike Allen, author of Axios AM. House Republicans plan to launch a new investigative panel this week that will demand copies of White House emails, memos, and other comms with big tech companies, top sources tell Axios. Speaker McCarthy plans a quick spate of red meat actions and announcements to reward hardliners who backed him through his harrowing fight for the gavel. The Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government is partly a response to revelations from Elon Musk in the internal documents he branded the Twitter files. House conservatives requested the subcommittee. McCarthy granted it as he worked to wrangle votes. The subcommittee will be chaired by House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan, a close McCarthy ally and a favorite of the hard right. The probe into communications between tech giants and President Biden's aides will look for government pressures that could have resulted in censorship or harassment of conservatives, or squelching of debate on polarizing policies, including the CDC on the pinko pox. The request for documents will be followed by compulsory processes, including subpoenas, if needed, a GOP source tells Axios. You know, before we got started, I actually saw that Jersey, my wife's son, Reliant, had actually come out and said, well, I don't know, after all the GOP people spit in the face of the subpoenas and didn't comply with them, I don't know why they expect people will comply with their subpoenas. Well, see, the people who are going to be getting subpoenaed this time through made it a big deal and said it was the end of the world if you didn't comply with the subpoena. So, well, I think we're going to get a lot of concessions as to the fact that this was, well, partisan bullshit. So that's what we have for that. Byron Donalds will be getting a committee appointment in exchange for his speaker vote. From Bradford Betts over at Fox News, Byron Donalds revealed on Sunday that he's being placed on the House Republican Steering Committee in exchange for supporting McCarthy for House Speaker. Donalds revealed the new appointment during a Sunday appearance on Sunday Morning Futures with Maria Bartiromo. His appearance followed an epic 15-ballot election. For McCarthy to become House Speaker, McCarthy had to make concessions to a small group of hardliners who refused to support him until he yielded to their demands. I'm frankly just happy that it's all over with and we got something transformational and sound for the American people, Donald said. It almost looks like he's probably going to be taking Mike Rogers' spot. And then, of course, there's the church committee. Thomas Massie tweeting out a video of Tucker Carlson, which we're going to watch, much to my disdain, but I know some of you guys like Tucker better than I do. Thomas Massie, Tucker Carlson suggested forming a new church committee. GOP leaders making this happen in the House Rules package. I'll serve on it, and we'll go wherever the evidence leads us. Which it sounds like, and I mean, there's not a lot of mainstream reporting on this one, but it sounds like Massie is actually going to be leading the church committee. But let's have a listen.
So we spent all week telling you about the fight on Capitol Hill over who's going to be the next Speaker of the House. Of course, at the beginning, the presumption was Kevin McCarthy was going to get the job, and then a group of his colleagues stood up and said, not so fast, and for a couple of days, they successfully held him off. Well, during that period, Kevin McCarthy decided to make some changes in the way he's going to administer the House and its priorities. And one of them is something that we've been talking about and certainly thinking about for quite some time, which is the creation of a committee modeled after the famous Frank Church Committee of the 1970s that will look a lot more closely at the influence of the FBI and the various intel agencies on domestic politics. They're not allowed to interfere in domestic politics. They clearly have been, and maybe Congress could get to the bottom of that. In fact, they're the only ones who can. Well, Kevin McCarthy's going to do that. Looks like he's going to be Speaker. And his plan, we have just learned, is to appoint really one of the most honest and dogged members of Congress, we'll just say it, Thomas Massie of Kentucky, to head that committee, the new church committee run by Congressman Thomas Massie, who, by the way, joins us now to announce it. Congressman, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Tucker. It looks like I'll probably be on that committee, but I can't say that I will run it. I will say that, while we've seen this drama unplay on the House floor, behind the scenes, along with those people who withheld their vote for Kevin McCarthy until they got the transformational changes in the House and the way the House works, we were working with to make sure that this church committee, a suggestion that you've had, and thank you for suggesting that I should be on it. I don't know if you're clairvoyant or just made the future happen, but it's happening. We were making sure that this committee wasn't going to be fenced in, that it wasn't just going to be a show committee. We wanted to make sure that we have full jurisdiction, that if we stumble onto something at another three-letter agency, that they don't say, whoa, that's out of your jurisdiction. Or if we find out there's more than a violation of the First Amendment right, if there are other civil rights that are being violated, we've secured a guarantee that we can go wherever the evidence leads us.
So everyone who's attempted this, and few have attempted it, but Frank Church certainly attempted it, and the Congress attempted it again in 1976 with their Special Committee on Assassinations. Those committees bumped right headlong into a wall of secrecy, and it drove a lot of them, those members, kind of crazy. Are you prepared for this honestly awesome task?
I think we are, and we've been laying the groundwork for that. Dan Bishop, my colleague from North Carolina, and Jim Jordan, we've been talking to the Intel Committee, which has the authority to get all of that information. By the way, a lot of this is going to play out down in the SCIF. You're going to have to trust the people that are put on this committee. And I'll tell you what, if there's something fishy going on, I'll come out of the SCIF and tell you. But a lot of it will be behind closed doors. There'll be classified information. But if we find anything illegal or unconstitutional, we will bring it forward.
Well, in your specific case, I believe you. And I'm so grateful that you're doing this. And I really hope that if you find anything like that, to the extent you can tell us about it, you will. Thomas Massie of Kentucky, thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
And I'm really interested to see what comes out of a committee like this. I really, truly am. The checks and balances need to be put back into place. And yes, Congress needs to take time and investigate what the executive branch is doing. And yes, the FBI is an arm of the executive branch, whether they follow the executive or not, as in the case of Trump. But we will see what happens with that and where that goes. Let's grab one from CNN. Actually, Tucker gave us enough information. I'm going to skip over that too. Let's skip a few here. The Pentagon prepares for a series of GOP-led investigations. From Haley Britsky and Oren Lieberman. Pentagon officials have held multiple high-level meetings in recent months in preparation for a barrage of Republican-led House investigations into issues varying from U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan to what conservative lawmakers have deemed woke military policies, according to a senior defense official. House Republicans have long signaled their intent to launch a series of probes if and when they gained the majority. Some of these priorities were flagged by Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee in November of last year when they released a 1,000-page report on what they said was the politicization of the Justice Department and FBI complete, with dozens of letters sent to various government officials, current and former, detailing inquiries about various DOJ and FBI investigations. After finally winning the protracted battle to be named Speaker, Rep. McCarthy suggested the Pentagon would come under scrutiny. "We will hold the swamp accountable, from the withdrawal of Afghanistan to the origins of COVID and to the weaponization of the FBI," McCarthy said. Pentagon leaders are well aware of the investigations could begin soon after the House members are sworn in. Well, again, I'm here for it. Let's see it. Let's put your money where your mouth is. What else do we have? Of course, the IRS agents. McCarthy, Bill number 1, when Congress gets back, repeal funding for 87,000 IRS agents. Again, my big problem with this is going to be, how do we get this past the Senate and the White House, which has already signed it into law, but, I mean, the sentiment is there.
But when we come back, our very first bill will repeal the funding for 87,000 new IRS. You see, we believe government should be to help you, not go after you. But when we come back...
Another one I'll believe when I see, but again, one of the big ones on this one is the fact that there are 2 other branches and chambers of government that need to be involved in this repeal. I want to see the repeal. If true, then McCarthy's got a very ambitious wish list. And by the way, if he does manage to get this pulled off or even get going out there, I will have some newfound respect for McCarthy. Not a huge amount, but I will have some for him. Another priority coming out of here from Politico. Mayorkas not fazed by McCarthy impeachment threat. From David Cohen. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said Sunday he has no plan of stepping down despite McCarthy threatening to impeach him. "I got a lot of work to do, SA, and we're going to do it," Mayorkas said on ABC's This Week, adding that he would be joining President Biden in his visit to El Paso later on Sunday, which we'll be talking about. Hopefully we'll get to it today, but I know that I don't want to overlap with the Porch Boys. So we're going to do a hard out at 8, even though we got started late. Or as hard of an out as we can. We do always do the outro. McCarthy and other Republicans have made Mayorkas a leading target based on what they perceive to be a crisis at the nation's southern border. If Secretary Mayorkas does not resign, House Republicans will investigate every order, every action, and every failure to determine whether we can begin impeachment inquiries, McCarthy said in his own visit to El Paso in November. For his part, Mayorkas didn't disagree with the idea that the nation's immigration system is broken. Well, you're kind of the one in charge of it right now, Alejandro. Alejandro. Damn it, now I have that song stuck in my head. Damn you, Lady Gaga! "We're dealing with a broken immigration system that Congress has failed to repair for decades," he told George Snuffleupagus. "And there is unanimity with respect for that reality." So, let it begin. Last one I want to do here is this one that came from Hakeem Jeffries' speech, which was also a 15-minute speech that I debated putting up here, but chose against at one point because Mr. Jeffries had to go down through every letter of the alphabet to insult Republicans. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries says Democrats will offer maturity over Mar-a-Lago. A dig at Trump's influence over the GOP, coming to us from insider from John L. Dorman. After 15 rounds of voting, McCarthy is the House Speaker, with control of the House having switched from Democrat to Republican. Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries of New York then stood before the full legislative body as he would soon hand over the gavel to the newly elected Speaker, a hallmark of the peaceful transition of power, because they have to go back and do that ceremony. In his remarks, Jeffries lavished praise on Pelosi, who served the first female speaker in U.S. history and held the title from 07 to 11 and again from 19 until last week, calling her a legendary legislator and a no-nonsense negotiator. He then proceeded to remark on how, in his eyes, Democrats would differ from Republicans in Congress, going through the alphabet and alluding to everything from a strong defense of the Constitution to former President Trump's continued influence within the GOP. And, by the way, we can actually see this. I don't know how far back we'll have to go on Alex Wagner tonight's Twitter page, but I know this goes back to Saturday. So 5 hours. Oh, it's right there. So here is the alphabetical portion of Jeffrey's speech tonight.
But I also want to make clear that we will never compromise our principles. House Democrats will always put American values over autocracy, benevolence over bigotry, the Constitution over the cult, democracy over demagogues, economic opportunity over extremism, freedom over fascism, governing over gaslighting, hopefulness over hatred, inclusion over isolation, justice over judicial overreach, knowledge over kangaroo courts, liberty over limitation, maturity over Mar-a-Lago, normalcy over negativity, opportunity over obstruction, people over politics, quality of life issues over QAnon, reason over racism, substance over slander, triumph over tyranny, understanding over ugliness, voting rights over voter suppression, working families over the well-connected, xenial over xenophobia, yes we can over you can't do it, and zealous representation over zero-sum confrontation. We will always do the right thing by the American people. But
No, I've read your agenda. No, you won't. No, you know what the worst part of this is? This is the exact same kind of stunt that gave us Barack Obama. A community organizer who got to be a first-term senator for no reason other than the fact that the machine politics of Chicago liked him, who then came out and made a keynote speech, and all of a sudden, he was the rising star of the Democratic Party. All right, that is all the McCarthy stuff. I don't think we're going to have to talk about McCarthy now for a while again. Hopefully not. Let's talk about Brazil. From CNN. Bolsonaro supporters break into Brazilian Congress and presidential palace. From Flora Charner, Marcia Reverdosa, Rodrigo Pedroso, Dakin Endon, Ala Elisar, and Heather Chen. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva on Sunday pledged to punish hundreds of supporters of the country's former leader, Jair Bolsonaro, after they stormed major government buildings, smashing windows and using furniture to form barricades against security forces. In a news conference, Lula da Silva described events in the capital, Brasilia, as barbaric and said a lack of security had allowed Bolsonaro's fascist supporters to breach barriers set up by the armed forces outside the congressional buildings, the Supreme Court, and the Planalto Presidential Palace. Wonder if they got let in too. These people are everything that is abominable in politics, he said, adding that all people who did this will be found and punished. Look, I don't buy anything on this one. I really don't. I wouldn't be surprised if our people were the ones who did this at this point. Footage on Sunday showed massive crowds in Brasilia walking up a ramp to the congressional buildings where they had reached the green room located outside the lower house of Congress's chamber. Interim Senate President Veneziano Vital de Rogo told CNN Brazil. Other outlets showed Bolsonaro supporters entering the Supreme Court and the presidential palace, where CNN Brazil showed the arrivals of anti-riot police and the Brazilian armed forces. The floor of the Congress building was flooded after the sprinkler system activated when protesters attempted to set the fire to the carpet, according to the CNN Brazil. Additional video showed protesters inside the building, taking gifts received from international delegations and destroying artwork. Isn't it funny, by the way, that this happened just a couple days after the anniversary of January 6th? Oh my god! Using a lot of the same MO and the same methodology of doing things. And by the way, even though it was an old photo, it was like a 1.5 year old photo, they also started talking about a Q shaman down there. And do you want me to buy this as grassroots and legit? No, sit down. Screw you. About 1,200 people are detained. Brazilian police detained about 1,200 people after Bolsonaro supporters stormed the Congress and other buildings. From Ivana Saric, thousands of supporters of Brazil's right-wing former president Jair Bolsonaro stormed the National Congress and other government buildings in the capital Brasilia Sunday in an attack that echoed, for a reason, the January 6, 2021 U.S. Capitol Selfie Fest by supporters of former President Trump, so-called. Yeah, don't buy it. But all the global leaders got to get their voices in on it. From Reuters, global leaders condemn assault on Brazilian government buildings. With no author given. Let's see. Here are reactions from around the world. The U.S. Embassy and consulate in Brazil condemned the attacks on democratic institutions and government buildings in Brasilia. Invasions by individuals who do not accept an election result violate the country's democracy, or the party's hegemony. We call for an immediate end to these attacks. EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell, appalled by the acts of violence and illegal occupation of Brasilia's government quarter by violent extremists today, full support to the Brazilian president and his government, to Congress, and to the federal Supreme Court. Brazilian democracy will prevail over violence and extremism. Chile. The Brazilian government has our full support in the face of this cowardly and vile attack on the democracy. Colombia. All of my solidarity to Lula and the people of Brazil. Fascism has decided to stage a coup. It's urgent for the OAS, Organization of American States, to meet if it wants to continue to live as an institution. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez of Spain. All my support to President Lula and to the free and democratically elected institutions of the Brazilian people, Hong Kong. We categorically condemn the assault on the Brazilian Congress and make a call for the immediate return to democracy and normality. Marcelo Ebrard, Foreign Minister of Mexico, in the wake of the events of Brazil. We express Mexico's full support for President Lula's admin, elected by popular will, Hong Kong. We reject any attempt against democratic institutions. And it goes on and on and on like that. Because the people who are encircled and ensconced in the positions of power want all other nations to join them in positions of power instead of fighting back against them. And wouldn't you be surprised, from the Daily Wire, big tech platforms remove content supporting pro-Bolsonaro rioters who stormed Brazilian federal buildings. From Ben Ziesloft. Social media platforms revealed on Monday that they would remove content supporting riots in Brazil that saw demonstrators storm multiple federal buildings. But you know what? They didn't remove content that showed people storming government buildings or burning down buildings in East Kenosha, for example. As long as the destruction stayed in the black part of town, of course. And by the way, it did. Thousands of supporters who backed former President Jair Bolsonaro in recent elections entered the facilities, hosting the South American nation's legislative and executive branches. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who assumed office last week, has vowed to punish individuals who destroyed federal property. Technology companies are now taking down material that supports the riots, according to a report from Reuters. That's right, you can't go on Facebook and say, solidarity with the people who feel like they got robbed by that government. And in fact, a spokesman for Meta is the first one on the playbill. In advance of the election, we designated Brazil as a temporary high-risk location, Hong Kong, and have been removing content calling for people to take up arms or forcibly invade Congress, Hong Kong, the presidential palace, and other federal buildings, a spokesman for Meta, which runs Facebook, told the outlet. We're also designating this as a violating event, which means we will remove content that supports or praises these actions. We are actively following the situation and will continue removing content that violates our policies. But the St. George riots? No, we'll continue to put that up there. Praise the St. George rioters. And this also reminds me that I do have to be very careful about what I say to this. YouTube, a subsidiary of Google, likewise told the outlet that the company is closely tracking the unrest and removing content that violates community guidelines. Our systems are prominently surfacing authoritative content on our homepage, at the top of search results, and in recommendations, a spokesperson said. We will remain vigilant as the situation continues to unfold. Twitter gave Reuters the finger. Twitter did not respond to Reuters' request for comment. Let's drop that one. But I do want to do this one. CNN anchor suggests the election denialism is becoming a U.S. export because of what happened in Brazil. From Chris Enlow. CNN anchor Jim Sciutto worked overtime on Monday to connect Donald Trump and January 6th to the chaos in Brazil. On Sunday, well, we know what happened with that. Sciutto said, speaking with former Rep. Joe Walsh, oh jeez, I didn't realize it was going to be that moron. On CNN about the unrest, Sciutto asked Walsh if the U.S. is becoming an exporter of election denialism, where it used to export democracy. Oh my God. Guys, that made my brain hurt. Reading that out loud made my brain hurt. Why? Why must we read things like this? Well, I guess my better question is, why must things like this happen to where we have to read things like this? Why do people like this have to go and snip their own farts constantly? What is wrong with this world? Let's just listen to this while my brain continues to hurt and throb.
And we're going to throw up some more of these images here. Those images of supporters of the losing candidate in the Brazilian presidential election, Jair Bolsonaro, storming the houses of government there, including where their assembly meets. You know, we used to talk about, and many folks still imagine this, and perhaps it's true to some extent, the U.S. exports democracy. But as you watch this and how it was seeded by the losing candidate in that election, who had a lot of rapport, one might say, with Donald Trump, is election denialism a new U.S. export?
Yeah. Jim, you know this so well because you travel the world so much. We're the world's oldest democracy. The rest of the world watches us. Clearly, the rest of the world watched us on January 6th. I never would have thought, Jim Sciutto, that 2 years removed from a violent attempt to overthrow an American election, that you and I would be sitting here and Donald Trump would still be the leader of the Republican Party and he would be running for president again. The world watched what we did on January 6th, and Trump and the Republican Party really didn't pay a price. My fear is that this is something that fledgling democracies around the world are learning from us.
Yeah, and many of the folks who denied the results of the 2020 election held great sway in the speaker fight.
And then Sciutto goes on to talk about, oh my God, look at us, and the people who did this, the insurrectionists voted in the speaker election. What? How could they do this? I hate this timeline. I really do. I hate every moment of it. From the Associated Press. Some good news from the courts. U.S. Appeals Court blocks ban on rapid-fire bump stocks. Which, by the way, I can make with a belt. From Kevin McGill. But, see, ammo is expensive. So I'd rather have control over my shot. A Trump admin ban on bump stocks, devices that enable a shooter. Second. Still got a lingering cough from when I was sick. Just a little bit of linger going on there. Devices that enable a shooter to rapidly fire multiple rounds from semi-automatic weapons after an initial trigger pull was struck down on Friday by a federal appeals court in New Orleans. Which is not true. None of that first paragraph is true because you're not doing a single trigger pull. You are doing multiple trigger pulls. It's just that there's mechanical force in the firearm, which is rocking back and forth, which is where your accuracy goes, that is helping you do multiple trigger pulls faster. The ban was instituted after a gunman perched in a high-rise hotel using a bump stock equipped weapons, which I don't believe that either. I do believe that he had something automatic up there. Massacred dozens of people in Las Vegas in 2017. Gun rights advocates have challenged him in multiple courts. The 13-3 ruling on the 5th is the latest on the issue, which is likely to be decided at the Supreme Court. The decision doesn't have an immediate effect on the ban, though, because the case now moves back to the lower court to decide how to proceed. The case was somewhat unique because issues involves not the Second Amendment, but the interpretation of the federal statutes. Opponents of the ban argued the bump stock does not fall under the definition of illegal machine guns in federal law, which is also unconstitutional. The U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, which should be a convenience store, not a federal agency, says they do, a position now being defended by the Brandon admin. A plain reading of the statutory language paired with close consideration of the mechanics of a semi-automatic firearm reveals that a bump stock is excluded from the technical definition of a machine gun set forth in the Gun Control Act and the National Firearms Act. Judge Jennifer Walker Elrod wrote in the lead majority of opinion. The court found the definition of a machine gun, which is set out in 2 different federal statutes, does not apply to bump stocks. Well, that's because there's no machine. But this is a good thing. Now, part of the bad thing is that the way this was decided involved the fact that it was done by executive order. And that executive order cannot go outside the bounds of the Constitution. But now they're going to come back to try to legislate this. And I would be interested to see where the constitutionality falls on the legislation as it goes. But as of right now, at least still a little bit of good news. Some other good news that some people are trying to spin as bad news from our friends in Ohio. Mike DeWine signs election changes into law, including photo ID requirement. Coming to 10 WBNS CBS out of Columbus from the Associated Press. Mike DeWine signed a sweeping package of election law changes Friday that includes the state's first photo ID requirement and shortened windows after Election Day for returning and curing ballots. In a statement, DeWine said the new law would protect election integrity. I appreciate the General Assembly working with my admin on changes to the House Bill 458 to ensure that more restrictive proposals were not included in the final bill, he said. Legislators included our suggestions to expand access to the valid photo IDs and to maintain Ohioans' ability to cast absentee ballots without the more restrictive identification requirements that were debated. The second-term governor signaled he may veto any further legislative attempts to restrict the state's voting laws, saying he does not expect to see any further statutory changes to Ohio voting procedures while I am governor. Maybe. Among other changes, the bill prohibits curbside voting, except for those with disabilities, and limits ballot drop boxes to one per county on board of elections property. Secretary of State Frank LaRose has set a one-location cap by directive in recent elections, but with multiple boxes allowed on site. A court case in 2020 clarified that he has the right to allow them to be placed at various spots around the county. LaRose, also a Republican, joined DeWine in supporting the new law, saying Ohio has found a common-sense way to impose a strict photo ID requirement without disenfranchising voters. Well, again, the big part of that is you need an ID to do literally anything else, which I don't necessarily agree with in and of itself, but you need it to do literally anything else. So how are you disenfranchising people? Since most everybody who's going to be doing this is going to have a photo ID in order to go pick up their welfare check. No piece of legislation is a silver bullet solution, but we are once again showing Ohioans that we take their concerns seriously and are dedicated to continuously improving our elections, he said in a statement. The new law also prohibits LaRose and county election boards from prepaying return postage on ballots. By trimming the time frames for mailed ballots and provisional processing, Republican lawmakers say they're trying to speed up the vote counting process that has come under public scrutiny since former President Trump's, and now it's the Associated Press, so they have to come in there and say, false claims that the 2020 election was stolen. Democrats and voting rights activists have called it an excuse for making it more cumbersome to vote in the state. They point to statistics showing that voter fraud is already extremely rare and say tightening restrictions is unnecessary. Ohio Democratic Party Chair Elizabeth Walters blasted DeWine for gracing the bill with his signature. Voting rights, civil rights, and labor and environmental groups are among those who had been begging him to veto it. So this is definitely a good thing, and I know when I saw the tweet that announced this, they said, well, elections matter because this got into law because state rights advocates wanted more state control. And I said, yeah, elections do matter. And this is still a good thing. From Axios, some financial news, and we are going to run out of, we're not going to get to the border stuff today, which is lame because I wanted to talk about a lot of that. From Axios, Colorado's egg shortage drives up prices, but relief could be coming. From Elena Alvarez. If you're watching this after the fact, or even watching this currently, put in the chat or put in the comment section what egg prices are where you're at. It is the cheapest place to get them is the Quick Trip here, which, I mean, that's typically the cheapest place to get eggs around here, is over at the Quick Trip. And that's at $4.99 a dozen. At the Woodman's, they're $8.16 for an 18 pack. It's cheaper to buy beer at this point. Colorado shoppers who've shelled out more money on eggs in recent months may have something to get excited about. I can't believe I just read that. Excited about. Pricey eggs are starting to retreat from December's record highs, albeit slowly, Axios' Kelly Tycho writes. The nationwide cool down comes after the price of a carton soared 49% in November, hitting the average of $3.59 a dozen, compared to a year earlier, according to the Consumer Price Index. Apart from inflation and consumer demand, costs have also been driven up by the deadly avian influenza outbreak, the worst in U.S. history, which has killed more than 6 million birds in Colorado, including 8 commercial flocks, per the USDA. The new egg shortage coincides with a new state law that requires locally raised chickens to be cage-free if their eggs are sold in grocery stores, which has also disrupted the supply chain. Some grocery stores, including Whole Foods, are now limiting egg carton purchases to 2 per person. The issue is also impacting Denver restaurants. Hoha, for example, announced this month it will no longer serve eggs in its breakfast burritos due to, in large part, to rising prices. So, those of you, and here are some prices around the Denver area. One of the things that's been affected with this, like they said, is stuff that's made with the eggs. So, most of you know that I have been on keto and I've been off keto on and off for life. I'm starting today, I went back on keto, which of course means that eggs are a huge part of my diet. So I'm starting back on it today, and I'm going to be getting some breakfast burritos. A friend is making them for me. So I chose to get, I don't know if you have them where you're at, but there's a wrap that you can get in most grocery stores around here. It's, the brand name is Egg Life, and it's basically, it's egg white and some xanthan gum. And that's pretty much it. And nothing else. And they make it into a little tortilla. But I mean, they were a little bit more expensive than a regular tortilla before the fact, before all this happened. $3.99 for a 6-pack, which is like $1.99 for a 24-pack of regular tortillas. But with the egg prices going up and up and up, I went to the Woodman's today and paid, and they were on sale too, by the way. $5.19 per 6-pack of Egg Life wraps, because they're made with eggs, and the eggs are more expensive, so the base ingredients are more expensive. I'm actually, with seeing the price of the 18-pack of the eggs, I'm actually just a little bit surprised that they were that low. I almost would have expected $7 or $8 per 6-pack. Click 2 Houston asking the question, what's causing the huge spike in egg prices? From Amy Davis and Andrea Sladen. We know food prices have been higher, but the price of eggs is skyrocketing, especially in Houston. The average egg prices more than doubled compared to what we were paying this time last year. BLS shows a national average of $2.58 a dozen, but the Houston average is $4.10 right now. We check prices at grocery stores around Houston, looking at the store brand for each. The Walmart, $5.27 for 12. $7.78 for 18. Kroger, $3.79, $5.69, 12 and 18 respectively. HEB, $3.99, $5.99, 12 and 18. The increase, of course, is due to the deadliest outbreak of bird flu last year. Bird flu killed about 60 million birds. Of those, about 43 million are egg-laying hens, according to the USDA data provided by the American Egg Board, a farmer-funded group which markets eggs. But the situation has been exacerbated by higher feed and energy costs, of course, and even a higher demand at the supermarket. Higher grocery prices over the past year means restaurants are charging more, so more people are choosing to eat at home. Experts have predicted that it might take another 3 to 6 months for egg prices to moderate. Well, we'll see. But it's definitely noticeable around here. More news out of Colorado. No confirmation on this from mainstream news, and this is just a bill, but it's being introduced. So those of you in Colorado, do pay attention to this. Colorado will be introducing an assault weapons ban. And the bill topic is, and this is a draft, so this is not coming to the floor for debate yet. Prohibition of assault weapons in Colorado. This does not have a bill number, any sponsorship. Well, it's got sponsorship. Bozenecker and Epps are the House sponsors, and Senate sponsor is Fields. One of the interesting things about this, and I paged through this a little bit, is that a pistol with a detachable magazine is considered by the definition on this an assault weapon. So if you are in Colorado or you know somebody in Colorado, make sure that they know this is coming and make sure that they understand what could happen to them if they get caught with something like this. What do we have time for? We are going to hold off on doing the border until tomorrow because we're out of time right now. So I think with that, we are just actually going to go straight to, some of the stuff is going to be thing I like, thing I hate on Thursday. I know it is. But where we're at right now, we're just going to go straight to the Ferengi Rules of Acquisition so we can get over and enjoy some Majora's Mask with our friend Midget B. And we're going to close out the show on this. So as I always do on Wednesday, we go over the Ferengi Rules of Acquisition. Of course, the religion of the Ferengi species from the Star Trek franchise, who is known for being extremely capitalistic, much like myself. We go through the rules of acquisition, which are supposed to be parodies of capitalism, but we do look at them and see if they can be applied to reality rather than just fiction. We left off on the 117th rule of acquisition. You cannot free a fish from water. Basic needs and biological needs will never ever go away. In canon, we lose 4 more rules of acquisition, and we move straight forward to the 121st rule of acquisition. Everything is for sale, even friendship. This is something that's especially prudent, given what just happened in the House of Representatives right now. Everything is for sale, even friendship. And that is the case. Now, for me, my friendship is free. You don't have to do anything. If I like you, I like you. If I don't, I don't. And I cannot be very easily bought, but a lot of people can. A lot of people find out that somebody wants to do something for them. And then it just winds up that, oh, hey, you did this for me, so now we're friends. But yes, we do have that situation where sometimes it's a friendship of convenience, sometimes it's a friendship of benefit for one or both parties, even if the two people can't necessarily stand each other. But I mean, the everything, we can look at the friendship side of things, and we can make a criticism of the way that Ferengi cultivate their relationships with each other. But we can also take a look at this and look at the top part of this. Everything is for sale. Everything is for sale for the right price. I have things around here that I would say that I would never ever sell for the life of me. I mean, right now I sit here and I say that about my pickup truck. I like my pickup truck. I don't want to go back and trade it in. But for the right price, and by the way, one of the Ford dealers around by where I used to live almost got to the right price. They came very, very close to getting to the right price. But, I mean, everything does have a price tag on it, believe it or not. If you're desperate enough, or if you can improve your life in whatever way, you'll sell. Friendship, that is a matter of your own personal convictions. But physical objects, yes. Or in some cases, I think there have been marriages out there that have been done for political gain or for personal gain or anything else, where people really aren't that much into each other. There have been a lot of those out there. So, one thing to pay attention to. And with that, we are going to head out of here for the day. Ooh, as one of my favorite songs on the playlist gets here. well, a remix on one of my favorite songs. I don't know if I necessarily like this remix. It's the one from Don't I and Button Masher Remastered. But there's some speech in there from a movie I've never heard. It sounds like it's coming from a movie. It's kind of muffled, so I can't tell what it is, but I do like this song. But we're not going to listen to this on the way out of here. We are going to throw the outro music out and head out of here for the day. Because I'm hungry. Back on keto means I didn't eat lunch. And while I didn't necessarily need to, it's starting to catch up with me right now. Alright, so thanks everybody who came by, hung out tonight. It was a slow night tonight, but I still see you guys there, and you guys are awesome. Thanks for joining me on your Monday night as we talked extensively about McCarthy, the Biden documents, which I do have a pin in that to talk about tomorrow. We'll be back here tomorrow. We'll talk about Biden's border visit since we couldn't get it out to it today. Some news about Senator Sass, because he is officially resigning, which I think is going to cause a few rifts going on in here, and possibly some things I like and things I hate as well, which may get passed on to Thursday. Plus, there's also, and I just found it while we were on air, but apparently the New York Post has put up an article saying Biden wants to go out and ban gas ranges. Why? Because he's Biden, I guess. I don't know. But with that, we're going to head out of here for the day. Thanks to everybody who came by and chatted, everybody who came by and lurked, and everybody who made their presence known. Come back and join me at 6 p.m. tomorrow. Whether or not we have a internet outage again. Spectrum, I'm talking to you. But we'll be back here tomorrow, definitely for more news, more headlines, and more contemporary. Looking forward to seeing that. Stick around if you're on the Twitch side as we go and raid somebody on that side. Although I won't be sticking around on the raid because we are going to check out Midget B and his playthrough of Majora's Mask over on the YouTube side. If you're not familiar with that, go check that out as well. Take care, everybody. Have a good night. We will see you next time. And until then, I am Jay Edgar, and this is Contemporary. Take care.